Hi, Nick Abell here, Chairman of Wright Hassall and also interim chair of the Coventry and Warwickshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Conscious that my last podcast was made just over a fortnight ago, and in that I outlined what the Coventry and Warwickshire Local Enterprise Partnership was all about and what it was trying to do to assist business at this very difficult time. And I thought it would be useful if I gave you a bit of an update and a few thoughts on where we are and what might be happening and how all of you out there can help us reshape the economy and input into what the government's thinking is about the whole recovery process. So I thought I'd start with looking at three specific sectors of business in the Coventry and Warwickshire economy. The first, which you will, I'm sure, not be surprised to hear me say, is the advanced manufacturing and engineering sector, a really important part of our economy. Clearly, we have a number of businesses in our area which are in the supply chain into our massive employer, Jaguar Land Rover, and also to Aston Martin and various other automotive manufacturers. So our economy over the last few years has really thrived on the back of some huge investment going into advanced manufacturing. And it was good to hear the other day that Jaguar Land Rover had agreed to reopen their Solihull plant, I think in the second week of May, which kind of gives some really positive vibes about the restarting of the economy. But of course, at the moment, there's been a huge impact on us locally. And indeed, the same company furloughed 20,000 of its staff just over a week ago. So I don't think it's rocket science to suggest that the whole automotive and advanced manufacturing sector is pretty critical to the Coventry and Warwickshire business economy. And of course, the most important thing about this sector is we are net exporters. It's really important to the government that we continue to be so. And it's really important to our local economy that we can provide the right conditions within which this industry can thrive. At the moment, we're home to a number of research and development faculties, the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, which is about to open, obviously West Midland, the Warwickshire Manufacturing Group based at Warwick University, and various others. But one of the reasons why there's a cluster of automotive and advanced manufacturing businesses in this part of the world, we need to sustain that. So really important, as I say, that we keep the environment right for these businesses to continue to thrive. The second sector I wanted to just briefly touch on was the higher education sector in particular. We, in Coventry and Warwickshire, were home to two of our leading universities, Warwick and Coventry, both of whom are in the top echelons of universities in the UK. Now, you know, it goes without saying, I think, that one of the successes of our universities is that they attract a number of foreign students. With the impact of COVID-19, it is unlikely that foreign students are going to travel as much as they have been over the last few years, and there is going to be a massive impact on the student numbers in our area, and indeed in all universities over the region and in the entire country. Now, it's interesting to reflect on that because two things really are really, really important. The first is that the direct economic impact that this might have on Coventry and Warwickshire. I was talking the other day to the Vice-Chancellor of one of our universities, and he said that 30% of every pound that is generated by universities ends up being spent in the local economy. Now, the combined turnover of Warwick and Coventry universities touches £1 billion annual. Now, mathematics don't need to be too good to be able to tell you that 30% of that turnover being taken out of our local economy is going to have an extraordinary impact. The second thing that's really important, I suppose, with higher education is, and this is a little bit of an indirect result of the diminution in foreign students, is it's likely that both of our universities will reduce their student numbers over the forthcoming years. There just simply won't be as many students. That being the case, there will be a direct impact on private landlords. A number of students, significant number of students, currently live in residential accommodation in Coventry and Warwickshire that's provided by the private sector. The universities themselves have significant resources in terms of student accommodation, but that'll be taken up first if student numbers fall, and private sector landlords will suffer loss of tenants. And the third thing about higher education is this. Not a lot of people know, but education and the next thing I'm about to talk about, tourism, are two of the top three sectors in the UK who are net exporters. So two of the top three net exporters from the UK economy are education and tourism. And so a diminution in our higher education sector is going to have a significant impact on our GDP and our net exporting numbers. So the third sector I want to talk about briefly was tourism. And I know a little bit about this because I'm very closely involved with the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford-on-Avon, where I'm a trustee. Stratford, of course, is a really interesting place. It's a beautiful town. It's got fantastic heritage assets, and it is home to some of this country's most valuable heritage sites. It attracts significant numbers of people to visit every year, and it has zero unemployment. And yet, in the latest figures that have been released about the district councils that are the most vulnerable in the entire country to seeing a huge downturn and an effect on unemployment figures as a result of the Covid-19 crisis, Stratford-on-Avon is in the top 10, which is quite a worrying thing for those of us who live there and those of us that do business there. You'd never have thought in a million years that Stratford-on-Avon would be worried about unemployment. If foreigners don't travel to this country as tourists, that will significantly hit the amount of money coming into our economy, the exports. So there's a huge problem, I think, especially in Coventry and Warwickshire, in three of our largest business sectors, in terms of the crisis that's currently hitting us. So to sort of move on from that, I think it's worth speculating about exactly how the government are going to manage the recovery, or as people are beginning to call it, the restart. I think it's important to understand that for a lot of businesses, when they are allowed to start trading again and open up, they're going to have to treat themselves as startups rather than going concerns. They're going to have to start again. So I think the word restart is probably quite a good one. And the interesting thing about those three sectors I've just spoken about is that although they're all net exporters and really important and all that, they're all very different. So how do you restart advanced manufacturing? You need to restart the factories. You need to re-engineer the supply chains. You have to make sure they're robust. You have to get the country back to work. That, I think, is already being talked about. As I already said, Jaguar Land Rover are reopening their factory in Solihull, and they'll start making motor cars again. That hopefully will have a knock-on effect down the track in terms of getting the whole supply chain re-engineered. So that is one thing, and you can easily see how the government might be able to stimulate that restart to work, how social distancing, safety can be managed in all of those situations. Education is slightly different, of course, because you need to attract students back to universities. Obviously, there's a significant amount of work being done on online tutoring and lecturing, but essentially the academic year, which starts in September, possibly needs to be worked towards, even with a reduction in student numbers, but still with a number of people congregating once more in and around those campuses. And a lot of work will have to be done again with social distancing and safety in mind. But the important thing is that you could actually see how that can be introduced or reintroduced slowly. Tourism is completely different again. Tourism you can look at really together with hospitality and leisure. If you're opening up tourist attractions, they're only successful if they attract an awful lot of people. The thought of tourists queuing in Henley Street in Stratford-on-Avon, keeping 6 feet apart from each other, waiting to go into Shakespeare's birthplace, which usually during the summer months, you have to queue almost in a sort of a snake-like queue to get into and then go through with a vast amount of people sharing it with you. The thought of social distancing through a historic house like that is probably quite attractive, actually, if you want to look at it. But from an economic point of view, it just simply isn't viable. The whole point of being able to open attractions is to be able to pay for the cost of doing that with sufficient visitor numbers to make that pay. And of course, the other thing about the tourist sector is that it's almost entirely dependent on successful summer months. And the idea that we're going to be, by the middle of July, August, somehow being able to invite people to come in large numbers to visit our tourist attractions is simply out of the question. So I think it's important for us to feed back into government as much information as we can about the businesses we know so much about, to enable government to make the right decisions, give the right calls about how this country is phased back into work. And my appeal to you today is to contact us. That's us at the Coventry and Warwickshire Local Enterprise Partnership, either through our Growth Hub, Coventry and Warwickshire Growth Hub, and by all means go onto their website to see their contact details, or direct to the Local Enterprise Partnership to myself to give us feedback about how your business is going to best be able to restart and recover, what assistance you need in the short, medium and long term from government to enable you to do that, what challenges you face that you need assistance to overcome, whether it be time constraints, money constraints, anything else. Then that's the sort of thing that needs to be fed back and needs to get through to government. The good news is that there's quite a lot of dialogue going on between all of the local institutions and central government, because central government are very keen to know exactly what it is business requires. It really is in the forefront of their thinking at the moment as to how they get this country back on its feet economically. Just within the last week, the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Simon Clarke MP, together with his colleague, the MP for Stratford-on-Avon, Nadeem Zahawi, who's also a minister in that department, have come direct to local enterprise partnerships, the 9 mayoral authorities and local governments to ask them to coordinate the feedback going to government about what it is businesses need. And so specifically, the local enterprise partnership, working together with our Chamber of Commerce, the FSB, and all of the other stakeholders, are going to coordinate part of the response going into government. And believe you me, the government really do want this to go in at the highest possible level. Yesterday, I was involved in a telephone conversation online, which was facilitated by Sir John Peace, who's chairman of the Midlands Engine. And we were joined on that call by the Minister, Simon Clarke, and he spoke to us at the end of the session for about 10 minutes and then invited questions, which we were able to ask for about half an hour. I was able to ask him a couple of very specific questions. One was to do with, and please forgive me for saying the word Brexit. I observed that certainly in our part of the economy, as having so many businesses who were net exporters, it wasn't just the Covid-19 crisis that was troubling businesses, but also what was happening about Brexit and the rules and regulations they're going to have to be complying with in terms of exporting and importing their goods as and when the trade agreement is or is not entered into. It's really important that we get this right. You can't business plan without knowing what the rules are. So, and nobody's been talking about Brexit. We seem to be a one subject media at the moment. It's gone from being Brexit as the only thing to talk about to Covid-19 as the only thing to talk about. It's understandable why, but perhaps there are, as with all these things, lots of other topics that we need to consider, and Brexit is certainly one of them. He assured me that the Brexit negotiations had kick-started again and that we would be hearing some updates about that. The other thing I asked him was about the Shared Prosperity Fund and about the capital programs that were being made available, many of which have been announced in the budget which came just before the crisis, whether they were still going to be coming forward and against what sort of timescale. And I was assured that that was going to happen as well, and that come September, a lot of those capital injection income streams were going to be announced and reconfirmed. So that's very good news for our economy because the Midlands were big winners in that budget. So it would be great to hear from as many businesses as possible with their concerns, their ideas, and what they would like to feed into government to try and shape this recovery, this restart. And so please, I would encourage you to do that. I'll leave you with one thought perhaps as well, is that everybody talks about the new normal, everybody talks about the economy that we're going to emerge into and exactly what that's going to look like. There is no doubt in all businesses I talk to, all business leaders I talk to say the same thing, that the way they do business will not be the same as it was. That means that there's going to be a lot of thought around reskilling our workers. There'll need to be a significant amount of funding produced by government to enable our educational institutions to offer the reskilling services and courses that are going to be necessary to enable people to work effectively in the new environment. I'm sure we're going to see huge differences as everybody's suddenly become aware that most of us can do our jobs sat at our desk at home. We don't actually need to get in our motor car. I don't know about those of you who are listening to this, but I've only been out in my motor car a couple of times since lockdown. It seems a very strange thing to have to get into. And actually, I quite enjoy not driving anywhere. So that's a thought, is that the whole idea of reskilling and changing the way that we operate, and also looking at how we need to ensure that our environment, our infrastructure is fit for purpose for this new normal, for the new business environment that we're all going to do business in. Connectivity is going to be really, really important, but how much of that is going to be physical connectivity and how much of that is going to be virtual connectivity? So government are being encouraged to think very far ahead and to commit to infrastructure projects that might have been quite a few years off in the making, but actually now should be the things that are right to the forefront of their mind. There is one There's one case in point in our area. A lot of research and development is going into something called the Very Light Railway. That's being funded from various sources, not least from Coventry and Warwickshire Local Enterprise Partnership. The Very Light Railway is a new technology that is going to revolutionise the ability to get around without getting into a motor car, and will help us connect into the major infrastructure spines like HS2 and a lot of the major trunk roads, and the airports to be able to move around our region very, very easily, rather than waiting years and years and years and pouring drip feeding little bits of research money into the VLR. It's kind of important now, I think, that the government says, well, there's a project which should be accelerated. There's a project we should start rolling out within the next 12 to 18 months and start building it, and really starting to make a difference to local economies, local communities, and the way that they're able to work effectively. So there are some thoughts. I hope you find them useful. I hope you find them stimulating. And again, can I encourage you, please, to feed into your local business representative organisations, whether that be the LEP through its growth hub, through me, the Chamber of Commerce, your local authority, because they want to hear from you and they want you to help shape the recovery. Thanks very much.